Hello, and thank you for tuning into our conversation, co-organized by the All-In Campus Democracy Challenge and the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics, From Compliance to Action, Supporting Civic Engagement with College Athletics. My name is Stephanie King, and I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives with the All-In Campus Democracy Challenge, an initiative of the 501c3 Civic Nation. I'm joined today with colleagues Stephen LaPorta of James Madison University, Shamaree Brown of Iowa State University, and Melanie Brunsdon of Winona State University to share insights related to supporting athletic programs and student athletes in particular in regards to their civic identity development. With the NCAA regulations related to civic engagement at the D1 and D2 levels, as well as service and engagement being pillars across all levels of collegiate athletics, we recognize that how coaches, athletic staff, and student athletes go about their civic participation varies by individual, and therefore we want to engage in this conversation to provide suggestions, how-tos, and resources for folks regarding nonpartisan engagement. For some background, the topic of civic engagement was highlighted in collegiate athletics leading up to the 2020 election when then assistant coach at Georgia Tech, Eric Revenue, who is now at Oregon State University, began a conversation about student athletes participating in the election and the role of coaches in supporting student athletes in doing so. Since then, the NCAA Division I SAC voted on and improved a Civic Engagement Day regulation. This meant that Division I student athletes would not have practice nor compete among other countable athletically related activities on the first Tuesday after November 1st every year, including the upcoming election day, which was then on November 3rd. The Division I Council approved the change at its meeting Wednesday. This regulation was then revisited in June of 2022, wherein the NCAA Division I Council adopted a new rule permitting practice and games to occur on Election Day, November 8, 2022, providing student athletes have a day off to participate in civic engagement activities surrounding national and local elections between October 24th and November 23rd, 2022, broadening the window for civic engagement at the D1 level. Similarly, regulations were passed for D2 student athletes as they adopted a civic engagement day as well. By 144 to 137 vote, Division II delegates narrowly adopted a proposal crafted by the D2 SAC that prohibits countable athletic-related activities such as practices and games on the Tuesday after its first Monday in November every year. The legislation's intent is to provide more opportunities for student athletes to participate in civic engagement activities like voting and volunteering. This change is similar to the legislation that passed in the D1 level back in 2020 and then revisited in 2022. I share all that just to give you context about why we're talking about civic engagement regulations at the D1 and D2 level, but also want to recognize that there's an importance to talk about engagement with nonpartisan civic participation at all levels of collegiate athletics, not just D1 and D2. And that's why we're here today. We at All In are thrilled to be able to uplift collegiate athletic programs with their engagement efforts. And for quick context, I just want to share that All In is a nonpartisan entity that works with 950 institutions across the nation, and we have a particular interest in working with collegiate athletics in a variety of means. First of which is that we offer athletic conference voting challenges. We partner with the National Association of Basketball Coaches and Women's Basketball Coaches Association to support the Coaches Pledge, and we also partner with the program All Vote No Play to provide a variety of civic drills to engage you and your student athletes in civic participation in a nonpartisan way. And with that, I'd really like to turn the conversation over to our colleagues here to learn more about their efforts and their values related to civic engagement. So as folks begin to speak today, I do want to make sure that they introduce themselves and then share a little bit about why incorporating civic engagement is an important value to them and for their student athlete development. Stephen, would you mind starting off the conversation with us?
Certainly, Stephanie. Thanks so much. My name is Stephen LaPorta. I'm the Assistant Athletic Director for Compliance at James Madison University. I'm also the chair of the Division I Committee for Legislative Relief and serve on the Division I Legislative Committee. As far as incorporating civic engagement and why it's important to our student athlete development, at JMU, like I'm sure many universities, we want to be preparing our students to be educated and enlightened citizens. And what we really mean by that is we're here to prepare our students for life after college. I feel like, especially at JMU, but I'm sure on many campuses, we live in sort of a pseudo bubble, and our students aren't aware of things that are going on around them in our surrounding communities, things that they're going to need to be prepared for once they step off the playing field and have that degree in hand. Our student athletes are the leaders of tomorrow, and the earlier we can educate them on the importance of civic engagement, the better off we're going to be.
Thank you for sharing. Melanie, would you mind sharing your thoughts?
Hi, yes, my name is Melanie Brunsdon. I'm Associate Athletic Director and Senior Women Administrator at Winona State University. I also serve on the Division II Membership Committee. To echo what was said before, we just really, truly believe that the development of our student athletes is holistic, right? It's our responsibility to help them grow, not only in their field of play, support them in their areas of studies, but provide them opportunities to give back to the community. And civic engagement is one of those facets of community engagement. So we encourage our student athletes to be active participants in the voting process by getting registered to vote, and one step farther, educating themselves on the candidates and their platforms.
Thank you for sharing. And again, Shamaree, would you mind doing the same?
Yes, that's absolutely good to see everyone. And as Melanie and Stephen both said, I kind of agree, right? As we talk about holistically developing our student athletes and being effective in their transition, I think for me personally, we expect our athletes, our student athletes, to be active in and accountable for the results of their behaviors. And the same is to be said for the results of their community outcomes, right? And so, as we challenge our athletes to prepare and study to get good grades and to prepare to achieve success on the playing field, playing surface by watching film and being knowledgeable and being actively engaged, the same is said in the community, right? We want them to be great citizens, we want them to be involved, to volunteer and do community service. But we also want them to be knowledgeable about the political landscape, be knowledgeable about all the various civic engagement activities that occurs outside of just voting and being registered to vote. It's certainly two of the main components of it, but helping them to understand that it goes even beyond that. It goes to, into relationships and knowing who's representing you and how decisions are being made, right? And so as we talk about the holistic development of our student athletes, helping them to find and understand the insight about decision making is one of those things that's vitally important, right? And so with our young people, as Stephen said, we kind of have them in a bubble, right? And don't get me wrong, this polarizing political landscape, I think, is troublesome to us all. And a lot of times our student athletes and a lot of people don't want to get involved in a political landscape. But the thing I say is, hey, you may not want to be involved in politics, but politics is involved with you on a daily basis, right? Regardless of what your beliefs are in, on one side or the other. And so I think it's important for us and our athletes to just be knowledgeable that they play a role in the decisions that's being made that affects them on a day-to-day basis.
No, that's so inspiring to hear the holistic approach that each of you is taking within your programs and your roles. To think of it, it's not just that they're student athletes on and off the court or the playing field, but they really are contributing members not only to your campus communities, but to the broader context of society and the world, which is huge to think about for an 18-year-old as they're entering into what is the next thing for them. But to know that they have that weight and that power to make change, and that it's important that they think about multiple factors of how to contribute and what is, again, the value of that contribution. If they choose to participate in the electoral process or they choose to participate in community, like it comes with pros and cons on either side of the conversation that you want to look at it. And it also makes me think a lot about, you have to flex your civic muscle, right? Like no one shows up on day one being the star athlete. I mean, they may have been the star athlete in a previous realm of their, preparation to the collegiate experience, but now's a new game for them when they're in college athletics. And so for you all, I really want to ask the question of, as we're asking students to prepare and train for their time on and off the court, like how do you help students, think about exercising their civic muscles? Like what resources do you find to be most valuable to you in uplifting the component of civic engagement as a part of the holistic experience for your student athletes?
Yeah, Stephanie, I'll jump in there. And I forgot to introduce myself as I started on that first question. I got excited, so excuse me. But once again, Shamaree Brown, Service Senior Associate Athletics Director here at Iowa State. And really for us, one of the biggest resources that I found, I've been here for a little over 2.5 months, almost 3 months, is a campus partner, right? So our director of our Women in Politics Center here on campus, Dr. Karen Kodrowski, has been an awesome resource for us, right? And connecting and helping us to educate our student athletes around everything with civic engagements. How do they register to vote, right? Whether they're registering here in Ames, Iowa, or registering back home, the various places they can vote. And then the resources, the websites that our student athletes, individuals can go to be informed. Right, we're asking our student athletes to get registered. We're asking our student athletes to go and vote, but we really want them to be informed, right, and making that a part of the process. So, the resources that you all provide from All In are great resources. But for me, the saving grace here at Iowa State has been our campus partnership with Dr. Karen Kodrowski.
Yeah, I would agree with Shamaree, in terms of the local support that you have, and really the biggest resource that we have is our people. A lot of these conversations aren't necessarily popping up, maybe in classrooms. A lot of times it's our academic advisors, that's sitting down with the student and the student's frustrated about something. So being able to have that conversation of, well, why are you frustrated? Well, what would you like to see done about it? And then educating them on, potential next steps to make that change. Here at JMU, we also have a Center for Civic Engagement, that's been a great partner with us, that provides opportunities. We also have a Center for, community service and learning. We're big believers that we need to get our student athletes out in the community. When they're out in the community and they can see what's going on around them, that's what's going to spark that potential, interest in a movement or for change is seeing and being involved. So we try to get them a wide array of just different experiences, because really that's what college is about. It's about experiencing. It's about learning what you want to do going forward. So our people are a huge resource, and to anyone that's looking for partnership, look on campus first. Look in your local community. There's plenty of people that are willing to help, that are willing to take the time to educate and spend time with our student athletes in this space.
Again, I'm going to echo what these two gentlemen said. We have our very own Dr. Karen Lindeman, who is our faculty athletic rep and chair and professor in our political science department here on campus. So she heads up a group on campus called Warriors Vote, and a few of our student athletes have been very active participants in that group, where they use methods of marketing on campus and on social media to really let everybody who follows those mediums educate them on what the process is for registering to vote in Minnesota, or what is it like in your home state. And then they also provide general information on candidates. So there's that educational part of it as well. I do also want to recognize Dr. Lindeman and that group for the efforts that they put through and the results that they had, because just a couple of weeks ago, Minnesota's Secretary of State was on campus to award Winona State student government president the Democracy Cup, which we received for the fourth time in a row for having the highest number of students with voter turnout of all four-year public institutions in the state of Minnesota. So in so many ways, Dr. Karen Lindeman gives back to athletics and the community and shows our student athletes how they can be more involved.
Hey, Melanie, I love that humble brag right there. Congratulations to y'all.
I had nothing to do with it. It is all of our students' hard work, right? And I'm going to promote that any way I can.
Great. I think Secretary Simons acknowledged that it's no longer a happenstance, but it's a trend. Like, Winona has developed a culture, and it stems from athletics and the work of the American Democracy Committee Council that Dr. Lindeman runs in partnership with Melanie and others, of you're changing campus culture, and your student athletes are a great starting point to make that happen. Like, they're known faces on campus. If they're voting and talking about participating in community, it likely has a tripling effect in other spaces on campus, whether that's in classes or other student groups or in community or just presence amongst the student body. Like, they tend to be trendsetters. And if civics is one thing they can find to be fashionable, for lack of better words, then it's likely to take off and has results, like being a Democracy Cup winner for the 4th year in a row. And that's only done every midterm and presidential year. So that's like technically 8 years of like carrying that title. So that's a long time. It's a decade's worth almost of civic engagement advancement at Winona State across the entire state of Minnesota, which is huge. The other question that I really am pondering for you all as you're at D1 and D2 institutions that you're most impacted by the recent regulation changes from the NCAA. And so just want to ask candidly of how has the regulation changes helped to support and advance your mission and purpose with civic engagement amongst your student athletes? And then for those that aren't in D1 and D2, I'm a naive optimist that those regulations may be forthcoming or that civic engagement might be heightened in other spaces for D3 and NAIA and so forth. But definitely want to hear your insights on how that's been helpful to you.
Yeah, Stephanie, I can start. Coming from a compliance background prior to 2020, civic engagement wouldn't have been an issue that would have crossed a compliance staff member's desk. Now that the legislation's been adopted, it kind of allows compliance members to step into an area of impact for our student athletes that we wouldn't have likely otherwise been involved with. JMU was able to be one of the members of the senior administration that helped to craft our policy. And now that civic engagement is a legislated topic, it kind of puts some teeth behind the intent of what SAC was hoping to achieve 2 years ago. And again, I've been able to hear directly from SAC members what the intent of this legislation is. They want to know what the opportunities are. They want to be educated on what resources exist. And that's something that we as adults that have experienced, been involved with civic engagement, can share with them. So, I think having legislation in place at the Division I level to actually enforce and require some of this has been a great thing for us.
Yeah, and I think it's allowed or provided a level of keeping us aware, right, of the need, right? This is a piece of legislation that on an annual basis, regardless of what the election cycle is in your community, we know that every year around this, November, second Tuesday of November time, there's a required day off. And, we're not gonna fake like it was the greatest piece of legislation when it was first initiated. It was some challenges for sure, right? We had teams that had schedules and things, but as we crafted it and it's gone this, second year around where it provides a little bit more flexibility and, giving us the ability to put a plan together, it allows us to be intentional in how we engage and communicate and educate our student athletes around civic engagement, right? It's tailored around the election day. We know it doesn't take a full day in most places to vote, but what it does do is provide enough time for us to educate, enough time for our student athletes to go and volunteer, enough time for us to really get a little deeper than just surface related to civic involvement for our student athletes. So I agree with Stephen. I think it was a really great piece of legislation to make sure that we're not in our bubble, right? Especially those that are in season where our coaches and a lot of times our student athletes are so focused on class and sport. No, let's see what's going on in the world outside of just sport. And it really makes us pause and dig a little deeper into our responsibility as citizens.
And I would just add, it allows us on the D2 level to be more intentional on our communication, right? We've been talking about election day now, almost every SAC meeting, every staff meeting. What are we going to do? So it may take 10 minutes to go vote. What are you going to do for the rest of your day? I mean, you'll still have class, but how are you going to give back to the community, whether that's volunteering, whether that's helping out at a polling place? We've been able to be more intentional and be more communicative in that intentionality.
Yeah, and I mean, to Melanie's point, it's civic engagement isn't just voting. right? Like that's one aspect of it. But what SAC was really trying to get across was, we want to be able to explore, have a voice. If we want to volunteer, we want to be able to do those things. So I think too often, coaches, especially here, civic engagement, and the only thought is voting. So in 2021 there was no midterm election. So why do we have to give this as a day off? Well, that's kind of missing the point on what SAC was trying to accomplish with this.
I also think, there's a lot of nuances within election regulations, and, athletic staff are experts in their rights. Like, no one wants me to teach you how to play tennis. Like, that's not anything you want to see happen. But to understand that by state and by county, like, there's variances in how people can participate democratically and the rights of students. And if I wasn't doing what I've been doing with All In and other civic entities, to know that college students have that choice, right? They can vote in their home state or they can vote at their college residence. So they kind of have that snowbird duality based on their residency clause. And so folks that argued, hey, in 2021, I didn't have elections. It's like folks in Virginia, New Jersey, and in the outset of, January of 2021 had huge state-based elections that were happening, right? But as individuals in the day-to-day, you might not be as in tune to what that looks like or why college students might care about participating in state-based or localized elections. And that's where entities like All In can be a support mechanism. And then to also understand that it takes time, and you all know this way better than I will. And I kind of believe, it takes like a 6-year cycle for folks to really think like, oh, election day off feels more normal compared to like year one, where there was challenges with scheduling and I'm sure a lot of waivers. I do not ever want to be a compliance staff or an NCAA person as a new regulation comes out. Like, I'm sure that's a heavy workload. But as soon as it becomes normalized, like, this is what we've always done, right? Like, we have this window of time, we have an opportunity. How do we make it meaningful? And it is, yes, casting an informed ballot, but also like there's space to be a poll worker. There's space to be someone who helps walk people to the polls to understand that regulation. There's folks that can volunteer or serve in different ways. And that servitude looks a lot different once it becomes normal compared to the like hard juxtaposition, which I'm sure many felt in 2020 and 2021, where it was like, well, we usually have tournaments on this day, or we usually have competition or prep. And now you're like, we'll do civics and it'll feel, I'm sure wonky is not the right word, or the word many offices used at that time, but hopefully over time it becomes more like, this is what we do and who we are, which is a hard space to get to. I think the other piece that I'd be curious to know from you all is, as you all between D1 and D2 are getting closer to that normal pace, right? This is going to be the second election for the D1 folks that are going through this. This is the first election for the D2 folks, but it'll become more happenstance. Like, what advice might you have for colleagues that are entering into athletics when someone says you're required to do something for civic engagement? What would you tell them? Like, what is the one piece of advice you may have needed, or one piece of advice you've leaned into to say, this is how you might do this and do it well?
My advice would be to incorporate it year long, right? Don't wait for the election cycle to begin to, get started with your civic engagement, or to incorporate it into your student athlete development curriculum year long, right? As your student athletes touch down or hit campus, especially your newcomers, go ahead and begin to get them to register to vote. Similar to as when you get a driver's license and they ask you if you want to register to vote, right? So from day one, begin to incorporate that and introduce that to your newcomers, and kind of feed it, as Melanie talked about, hey, a few minutes here and there, as far as building the culture and understanding throughout the year. And then I'll say the other piece for me that's been really beneficial is the relationships, right? I think student athletes are more inclined to get engaged and to listen to those they have relationships with. But then also, one of the things I've been able to use as we've been signing our student athletes up, to vote and register them to vote, is to understand and get an idea to the backgrounds of our student athletes. Hey, where are you from? We're trying to register you to vote. Where are you from? What state are you from? And so that helps me to build relationships with our student athletes as a new staff member here. So relationships are going to be key on both sides as well. But my two recommendations would be start early, do it all year, and develop relationships with your student athletes.
I think having an active participation from your SAC, from your student athletes, we don't put the civic engagement packets and policies together for the administrators, like, this is for our student athletes. So getting them involved in the decision making, at JMU, to echo what Shamaree said, like, this is going to be a year-round thing. We put together a menu of options that students could do that aren't just on November 8th. There are things before, there are things after, and SAC's going to work on putting together a calendar for the spring of different civic engagement and community service type opportunities, that our student athletes can be involved in. But again, that's going to be a SAC initiative, because they're the ones that need this. They're the ones that are seeking out these opportunities. So I would say making sure you're partnering with your student athletes when you create this, because they're the ones that are benefiting from it.
And I think possibly working in reverse order a little bit here is, would you mind sharing just a little bit about what are the programs or the menu of opportunities that your student athletes are considering as part of their civic engagement exploration this year? I would hope voting is one, but if you have other ideas, like, how are your students thinking about civic engagement more broadly?
Yeah, I brought up the menu, so I can start with that one. Obviously we have information about local elections, how to get registered, polling places, absentee balloting, everything like that. Realizing that not all students, have time to maybe go out during the day with class schedules. We create virtual opportunities, so there are things like TED Talks, that we're recommending for our student athletes. The political quiz of I Side With, so that they can learn about the candidates. Those are all things that you can do from the comfort of your couch if you want to. As far as in-person opportunities, we found things in the local community that are either educational based, volunteer based. Volunteermatch.org has opportunities for civic engagement in your local area. So providing them that resource, a lot of our students didn't know volunteermatch.org was even a website. So putting that in front of them so that they can learn about some of those things, providing links to, again, your on-campus resources, any local resources that may be out there. So those are just some of the things that we've tried to do here at JMU, through our Duke's Lead, which is our student athlete development arm. Again, they're asking our students to write reflection papers on some of these things if they're going to choose to do a virtual opportunity. Tell us what you learned. It doesn't have to be a 10-page paper, but what's a highlight that you got out of that TED Talk? Things like that. So the conversation can continue, and it's not just I spent 30 minutes listening to this, now I'm done. Submit that, and it allows our staff to then follow up and say, hey, that's a great point you made. Have you ever thought of this?
Steve, that's awesome. Can you say the name of the political quiz again? Because I took a note there. I have to use that one.
isidewith.org.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, .com.
Oh, that's really good. And similar, we have a lot of similar programming ideas and initiatives here at Iowa State. But as Stephen has mentioned as well, we're leaning really heavily on SAC, right? SAC is a group in which they're really modeling a lot of what we're asking them to do in the community, right? Locally, statewide, nationally, right? As far as using that platform and being able to make decisions and understand the different sides of opinions and things like that, right? So really helping our student athletes to understand and see the connection between what they're doing, as student athletes with SAC and how, governments work, but then also connecting with our student body government, our SGA and the leaders within SGA, right? Once again, kind of tying the connection to what's going on locally here on campus and how civics works, in the local government as well as state and nationally. And then the other piece is, once again, the service component. Our student athletes do a lot of community service, but out of the goodness of their heart most of the time, but not necessarily realizing the impact that it makes and that it has for individuals and how it changes the community around them, right? As a civic engagement activity. Our student athletes aren't doing community service because it's a civic engagement activity. They're doing it because there's a connection point that they like to do it. They've made some type of relationship with someone that they have that heart tied to. And so I think outside of what Stephen said, those are two additional areas that we're doing here at Iowa State. We're also fortunate to have three classes here from a student athlete development standpoint, in which we're able to deliver a lot of our content through our student athlete development classes, two for incoming student athletes and then one for our upperclassmen. So that really provides a lot of opportunity for us to deliver that type of content without asking for too much additional time outside of practice from our student athletes.
Well, I feel behind the 8 ball because we do not have a menu of options for our student athletes. We are, of course, encouraging them to become educated, go out and vote if they aren't voting by absentee ballot. But we're also working on making it possible for others to go out and vote, and trying to open up our gym on that Tuesday. So if there's any parents who have young ones, they can drop them for 15 minutes, go vote, come back and pick their kids up. So tying both in that civic engagement plus volunteering, supporting people who support us. We're a smaller community, a smaller school. So just trying to create those relationships or strengthen them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I also think it's helpful for folks to know that you don't have to have the menu right now, right? Like we're all still trying to figure out what's going to work best for our own campus communities. And then also your student athletes change, right? Like they change every semester. And so making sure you're not too rigid in how you're being prescriptive of what the work is, but allowing space for the SAC and for others to contribute to what's most meaningful to them. Like, are there social justice issues that they want to attach to civics? Are there community-based concerns like potholes in the streets, right? Like those are all localized pieces that your students might care about more than what you might assume is the big ticket item. So I think having a voice in place is really, really important. And as we're leaning in at this moment in time, we're about a week out from the election. I think one thing I'd like to leave our attendees with is, what's something that you're optimistic about or one outcome that you're hopeful to see as we lean into this year's election processes?
I'm hopeful that our student athletes will increase the engagement rate for this midterm election, right? I mean, I think we've seen here, at least in Iowa State, that it's not the same level of excitement as it was for the 2020 election, right? General for midterms. But our plan and our goal is to increase our outcome, our engagement rate for not only all of our students, but specifically in this realm, our student athlete engagement rate when it comes to their voting participation.
I'm hoping we can finish the election season with more enlightenment and knowledge than when we started. While participation in the election process is important, I don't think that should be the only metric that we use to determine if we've been successful or not. We want to be able to spark conversations. We want to see our student athletes learn. We want to see them become passionate about something. Our student athletes, if there's anything we've seen over the past year and a half, they've got a tremendous platform. And how are they going to use that platform? Are they going to use that platform to generate change? Because they certainly can if they want to. It's our job to kind of help identify what things they may want to change. Again, then they can use their platform for that change.
I think the thing that gives me the most hope in all of this is the day that we had the Secretary of State on campus. We had a separate meeting in which 3 of our student athletes, who are also part of Warriors Vote, were speaking on the process that they've gone through to get to educating people and the discussions that they've had. And that day reminded me why I love being in higher education, right? Because they found a passion. And we weren't talking about X's and O's of competition. We weren't talking about, oh, how are your midterms going? Like, what papers do you have coming up that are due? It is, they found a passion and they're exercising their rights as American citizens to let their voice be heard via the vote. And one of them was even a Canadian citizen, and she's talking about how impactful American politics is on Canada right? So just bringing that whole aspect into everything, that's what brings me the most hope, is that I think our student athletes are taking this as an opportunity to be educated, and they're having tough discussions that maybe people in my generation, we wouldn't have had, because we just go in and we don't share how we vote, right? So that's what gives me the most hope.
Thank you all so much. I feel like all of our student athletes give me a lot of hope. And then working with folks like you all, our compliance officers, our senior women administrators, our coaches, our ADs, you all are a beacon of hope to really say that you're prioritizing what a civic engagement mean in a nonpartisan context, right? Like you're not telling them who to vote for or what party to register for, but instead you're saying, here's your buffet or your menu, as Stephen put it, here's your menu of options for engagement. You have a choice whether you choose to engage or not, and you have a choice of what that outcome looks like in terms of your engagement. And so you all give me hope, and those that tune into this conversation, like you're a beacon of hope of what's next. And again, we're all just starting out. We know that it's complicated. We know that new regulations come with their own nuances that we will someday figure out and iron out, and then the new regulation will pop up. So I understand it's like a ever evolving piece, but to also share that folks like All In, you can find resources on our website at allinchallenge.org/coaches, or a great student athlete platform is allintovote.org, which will again walk them through the process of registering, researching their ballot to make that values-based decision on who they want to vote for, as well as making the pledge to ensure that they're going to turn out to vote. As we know, as we talked about, Shamaree, your gear is being like the civic engagement really tripling or leaning into higher registration and turnout rates in 2022. But the other piece is we know that most students can register pretty easily, but there's a huge drop off when it comes to turnout. So anything we can do between the next week and thereafter to encourage that active, showing up for the election is really important. And so that Pledge to Vote campaign is one thing that we're really proud of to help support your student athletes in making that final commitment. And so with that, I definitely want to thank you all, Stephen, Shamaree, and Melanie for being a part of this conversation. And for others, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the All In team or the NACDA team, and we'll make sure that you get the support that you're looking for. Thank you all so much.